The Whisper of Savannah. Chapter 1. The Signal. The humid breeze from the Savannah River crept through the cobblestone streets of the historic district, carrying with it the metallic scent of the morning mist. Elijah Carter walked aimlessly, as he did whenever he needed to clear his mind. He was a history student at the University of Savannah, passionate about the forgotten secrets of the past, but that morning he felt an unease he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the weight of the final exams, or simply the oppressive atmosphere of the city, laden with centuries of tragedies. Turning a corner, he found himself in front of an antique store he had never noticed before. The sign above the door read "Relics of the Past" in faded letters, and the windows were covered with a thin layer of dust. Something about the store drew him in, as if calling him from another time. He pushed the door open, and a rusty bell announced his entrance. The interior was cluttered with strange objects. Antique clocks stopped at impossible hours, mirrors with gilded frames reflecting unsettling shadows, and boxes filled with black and white photographs. Elijah moved between the shelves with curiosity until something caught his attention. An analog antenna covered in cobwebs. It was a model from the 70s, with long metal rods extending like skeletal fingers.
Interested in that?
Asked the store owner, an old man with sunken eyes and a raspy voice.
I'm not sure. It just seemed curious,
replied Elijah as he ran his fingers over the cold metal.
That antenna has a history,
said the man.
I found it in an abandoned house near the swamp. They say it picks up things that shouldn't be there.
Elijah smiled nervously, thinking it was just a strategy to sell him the object. But something in the man's voice unsettled him enough to decide to take it. He paid in cash and left with the antenna under his arm, feeling a chill run down his spine as he crossed the threshold. Back in his small apartment near campus, Elijah connected the antenna to his old television, more out of curiosity than anything else. He adjusted the rods and turned on the television, expecting to find only static or blurry local channels. However, after a few minutes of adjustments, something unexpected appeared. Channel 13.3. The screen showed grainy black and white images of a desolate landscape, a swamp covered by a thick fog, with twisted trees adorned with Spanish moss hanging like shrouds. Elijah frowned. He recognized that place. It was one of the swamps south of Savannah, a site he had visited during a university excursion on local history. Intrigued, he left the channel tuned in while taking notes in his notebook. The images changed slowly. First, a cemetery with leaning tombstones covered in lichens. Then an abandoned mansion with broken windows and walls blackened by time. Finally, dark tunnels illuminated only by fleeting flashes of light. Elijah felt his skin crawl as he recognized each place shown on the screen. They were real historical sites of Savannah that he had studied or visited personally. The Bonaventure Cemetery, known for its Gothic sculptures. The Mercer House, famous for a murder that occurred decades ago. And the underground tunnels used to smuggle slaves during the 19th century. 13 minutes passed, exactly since Elijah tuned into the channel, when something changed drastically. The image began to distort. Black lines crossed the screen, while a sharp buzzing filled the room. Elijah tried to turn off the television, but the button did not respond. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the screen. It was a man dressed in Victorian clothing, a dark suit with an embroidered vest and ascot tie. His skin was pale to the point of appearing translucent, like rice paper, illuminated from within. But the most disturbing thing was his eyes. They were not human eyes, but radio dials that rotated constantly while emitting a slight crackling. The figure tilted its head slightly towards the camera and spoke in a low, reverberating voice that seemed to come from both the television and the air itself.
Welcome to Channel 13.3,
He said.
I am the host, and I have been waiting for you, Elijah James Carter.
Elijah recoiled instinctively upon hearing his name come out of that impossible mouth. His heart beat strongly as he tried to rationalize what he was seeing. It was impossible for that figure to know who he was. Right?
Tonight,
Continued the host.
I will announce your personal obituary. This morning, on East Broad Street, Elijah James Carter will be found without a tongue.
Elijah felt his blood run cold upon hearing those words. He tried to turn off the television again, this time unplugging it directly from the outlet. The screen went blank instantly, but his reflection remained trembling in front of him for several seconds before disappearing completely. For several minutes afterwards, Elijah remained sitting in absolute silence, trying to process what had happened. His rational mind sought logical explanations. Maybe someone had manipulated the signal, or it was some kind of elaborate prank. But no theory could explain how the host knew his full name or where he lived. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rotating dials where human eyes should be and heard that whispering voice announcing his imminent death. The next day, he decided to investigate more about Channel 13.3. He visited online forums dedicated to paranormal phenomena and found sporadic mentions about strange transmissions picked up through modified analog antennas in Savannah and its surroundings. Some users talked about spectral figures appearing after 13 minutes. Others mentioned receiving personalized messages announcing future tragedies. But the most disturbing thing was finding a recent comment signed by someone named Clara M. that said, "If you are reading this because you saw the host, it's already too late." Chapter 2. The Tapes. Elijah couldn't get the image of the host out of his mind, nor the words he had spoken. For days, he avoided turning on the television, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Even when he walked through the streets of Savannah, he felt that the shadows were lengthening too much, and that the reflections in the windows seemed to move slightly out of sync with the real world. Something had changed since he tuned into Channel 13.3, and he knew it. Determined to understand what was happening, Elijah dedicated hours in the university library and in online forums, searching for any information about anomalous transmissions or phenomena similar to Channel 13.3. It was in a dusty corner of the library where he found an archived article on microfilm that briefly mentioned a strange case that occurred in Savannah in 1985. A woman named Clara Matthews had reported receiving an anonymous Betamax tape after capturing an unusual television transmission. According to the article, The tape showed disturbing images that foreshadowed her death. Elijah felt a chill as he read the end of the article. Clara Matthews was found 3 days later drowned in the Savannah River, exactly as shown on the tape. With that initial clue, Elijah began to track more similar cases. In a forum dedicated to local paranormal stories, he found a thread titled, "The Savannah Tapes: Myth or Reality?" The comments were scattered, but several users mentioned hearing about people who received Betamax tapes, showing their future deaths after tuning into a strange channel. One of the most detailed cases was that of Samuel Whitlock, which occurred in 2001. Samuel Whitlock was an elderly man who lived alone on an old family plantation north of Savannah. According to rumors, he received a tape showing his charred body in the middle of what appeared to be a forest fire. 3 days later, his house was consumed by flames, and his body was found exactly as described in the recording. The most disturbing thing was that the analog clock shown in the background of the video was stopped at 3:03 a.m., the same time recorded as the start of the Great Savannah Fire in 1820. Elijah couldn't ignore the similarities between these cases and what he himself had experienced with the host. But just as he was beginning to connect the dots, something happened that shook him to his core. It was a rainy night when Elijah returned to his apartment after spending hours researching in the library. Upon opening the door, he noticed something strange. On the dining room table was a small box wrapped in aged brown paper. He didn't remember leaving it there or receiving any packages recently. With trembling hands, he untied the string that secured the package and discovered a Betamax tape inside. The label was handwritten in faded black ink. Elijah Carter. His heart raced at seeing his own name there. It was impossible for this to be a coincidence. For several minutes, he contemplated the tape without knowing what to do. Finally, driven by a mixture of curiosity and terror, he dusted off an old Betamax VCR that he had found months ago at a garage sale and connected everything to the television. When he inserted the tape and pressed play, the screen flickered before showing grainy images. At first, he couldn't distinguish anything clear, only shadows moving slowly between intermittent flashes of green light. But then he recognized something that made his blood run cold: the underground tunnels under River Street. He had visited those tunnels during a university excursion about smuggling and human trafficking in Savannah. They were narrow, dark, and claustrophobic, with walls covered in mold and rusty chains hanging from the ceiling. In the video, Elijah saw a solitary figure walking through those tunnels, himself. The future version of Elijah looked exhausted and terrified as he slowly advanced through the tunnels, with a trembling flashlight in hand. The shadows around him seemed to move with a life of their own, whispering incomprehensible words that mixed with a constant buzzing, similar to the static sound of the television. Suddenly, the camera zoomed in on the face of the future Elijah as he turned towards something out of frame. His eyes were full of absolute panic when he dropped the flashlight and screamed, but no sound came out. The screen filled with static before showing a last disturbing detail. An analog clock stopped at 3:03 a.m. Elijah turned off the television abruptly and sat in absolute silence for several minutes. His mind tried to process what he had just seen. It was as if he had received a direct warning about his imminent destiny. But how could it be possible? Who had recorded that tape? And why did it seem so inevitable? The following days were a whirlwind for Elijah. He barely slept or ate while trying to find answers about the Betamax tapes and their connection to the host. He visited local historical archives to look for similar patterns in old records, and even spoke with an eccentric professor from the parapsychology department, known for investigating supernatural phenomena. The professor explained something disturbing to him. Savannah was known as one of the most haunted places in the United States, due to its tragic history. Deadly epidemics, devastating fires, and centuries of slavery had left deep physical and spiritual scars on the city. According to some parapsychological theories, these traumatic events fractured the veil between dimensions, allowing residual energies or supernatural entities to interact with our world.
If what you describe is true,
said the professor, while thoughtfully stroking his beard,
the host could be more than just a simple spirit. It could be a collective manifestation of the pain trapped here for centuries.
Elijah didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more terrified by that explanation. But one thing was clear. He had little time to act before facing the destiny shown on the tape. One night, while reviewing the paranormal forums again, looking for any additional clues, he found a recent comment signed by someone named Clara M. It said, "If you are reading this because you saw the host, it's already too late." The name sounded familiar to him. It was the same one mentioned in the 1985 case. Before he could fully process that discovery, he heard something behind him. Static, coming from the turned-off television. He turned slowly towards the black screen, and there was the host again, looking at him from behind the dark glass, as if he were trapped inside the device.
Time is running out,
he whispered in a metallic voice.
We'll see each other soon, Elijah James Carter.
The screen went black again on its own, while Elijah remained paralyzed by fear. Chapter 3. The Ritual. Elijah had spent entire days plunged into a spiral of fear and obsession, desperately searching for a way to stop what seemed to be an inevitable destiny. The images from the Betamax tape repeated in his mind again and again. The dark tunnels, the shadows whispering his name. The clock stopped at 3:03 a.m. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his own terrified face before the screen filled with static. The sense of urgency grew with each passing hour. He knew that if he didn't do something soon, he would end up trapped in the tunnels under River Street, facing the unknown. But what could he do? How did one face something like the host, an entity that seemed to be beyond the laws of time and reality? It was during one of his nightly visits to the genealogical library of Savannah when he found something that gave him a glimmer of hope. He was reviewing ancient manuscripts related to local legends when he stumbled upon a document dated 1876. The text, written in tight, almost illegible handwriting, described a ritual performed by a group of desperate residents to stop a series of unexplained deaths attributed to the shadow of the swamp. The ritual seemed designed to attract and confront a supernatural entity similar to the host. According to the manuscript, the process required 3 specific steps. Take a photo under the light of the full moon. The photo should capture the participant in a place charged with spiritual energy, such as a cemetery or a site where a violent death had occurred. Burn the photo while reciting AM radio frequencies in reverse order. This apparently altered the veil between dimensions, weakening the barriers that kept the entity contained. Bury the ashes in a place marked by human tragedies. The text specifically suggested Wright Square, known for having been the site of public executions during the colonial era. Elijah read and reread the manuscript, trying to understand every detail. Although he wasn't sure if it would work, he felt it was his only option. If he could attract the host to the physical plane and confront it directly, maybe he would have a chance to break the cycle. That same night, Elijah began to prepare for the ritual. First, he needed a Polaroid camera, something that wasn't easy to get in the 21st century. After searching in local stores and online forums, he finally found one in another antique store on the edge of the historic district. The camera was worn but functional, and it came with an almost intact pack of instant film. The next step was to choose the right place to take the photo. After much thought, he decided to go to the Bonaventure Cemetery. It was a place charged with history and tragedy, with its Gothic statues and leaning tombstones covered in Spanish moss. In addition, he had heard stories about paranormal phenomena that had occurred there during his years as a student. The night was cold and silent when he arrived at the cemetery with the camera in hand. The full moon shone weakly through the clouds. As Elijah walked among the tombstones, looking for the perfect place to take the photo, he finally stopped in front of an angelic statue covered by elongated shadows. With trembling hands, he pointed the camera at himself and pressed the shutter. The flash briefly illuminated the surroundings before plunging back into darkness. Elijah took the newly printed photo and waited for it to slowly develop under the silver light. When he finally saw the complete image, he felt a chill run down his spine. Behind him, there was something he didn't remember seeing before. A dark figure stood among the distant tombstones, barely visible but unmistakable. Although he couldn't distinguish specific details, he knew exactly who it was. The host. With the first part of the ritual completed, Elijah returned to his apartment to prepare the next steps. He placed the photo on his table and gathered the necessary materials, matches to burn it, and a handwritten list with AM radio frequencies taken from the ancient manuscript. The instructions were clear. He had to recite the frequencies in reverse order while burning the photo under controlled conditions. However, there was an unsettling warning at the end of the text. If the smoke takes on an emerald green hue, it means that you have fully attracted the entity to the physical plane. Despite the fear he felt, Elijah knew he had no other option. He lit a candle over a metal container to hold the ashes and held the photo in front of him as he began to recite the frequencies.
710 kilohertz, 490 kilohertz, 280 kilohertz.
His voice trembled as he pronounced each number carefully, When he reached the end of the list, he lit a match and set fire to the photo. The flames started slowly but soon intensified, consuming the image, while Elijah carefully watched every detail of the smoke as it rose towards the ceiling. At first it was dark gray, but then it changed. An emerald green flash briefly illuminated the room before fading into undulating shadows. Elijah felt the air get heavier. There was something different now, something present. Before he could fully react, he heard a sound behind him, a low, metallic whisper that seemed to come from both the air and the inside of his own mind.
"Well done, Elijah,"
said the host, his voice resonating like amplified static.
"Now we are together."
Elijah turned quickly to where the sound came from, but saw nothing beyond the dim flicker of the apartment lights. However, he could feel it there. The host was close, watching him from some invisible corner. He knew what the next step was. He had to bury the ashes in Right Square to complete the ritual and perhaps gain some control over what he had unleashed. Without wasting time, he gathered the burned remains along with his flashlight and ran towards the historic site. Right Square was deserted when he arrived shortly after midnight. The streetlights cast long shadows on the cobblestones as Elijah searched for a suitable place to bury the ashes. He finally chose a corner near the center, where he knew that public executions had taken place centuries ago. As he dug hastily with his bare hands, he felt the pressure in the air around him increase. It was as if the entire space was being slowly compressed by an invisible force. When he finally deposited the ashes in the improvised hole and began to cover them with earth again, he heard another whisper.
"This doesn't end here,"
said the host, his voice closer now.
"We have only just begun."
Elijah quickly finished his task before getting up and looking frantically around for any physical sign of the specter, but he saw nothing beyond the occasional movement of the hanging moss, stirred by the night wind. Although he had completed the ritual, according to the instructions in the ancient manuscript, he couldn't shake the lingering feeling that something had gone wrong. Chapter 4. Final Episode. Elijah returned to his apartment after completing the ritual in Right Square, but the feeling of relief he expected never came. Instead, he was enveloped by an oppressive calm that he couldn't explain. Everything was too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Although he had followed the instructions in the manuscript to the letter, he couldn't ignore the final warning. If the smoke turned emerald green, the host would have crossed over to the physical plane. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat on his couch with the flashlight in hand, and his eyes fixed on the turned-off television, fearing that it would turn on again by itself. Every shadow in the corners of the room seemed to move slightly when he wasn't looking directly at them, and the low hum of the appliances reminded him too much of the sound of static. At exactly 3:03 a.m., a knock echoed on the door. Elijah jumped up, his heart pounding. For several seconds, he didn't move, hoping it was a hallucination or an external noise. But then he heard another knock, louder this time, followed by a metallic whisper that seemed to filter through the walls.
"Elijah,
The voice was unmistakable.
It's time.
Gathering all his courage, Elijah slowly opened the door. But there was no one there. Only the empty hallway, illuminated by the flickering light of a defective bulb. However, something caught his attention. A Betamax tape rested on the floor in front of his door, wrapped in brown paper identical to the package he had received before. With trembling hands, he picked up the tape and closed the door behind him. He knew he shouldn't watch it, but something inside him pushed him to do it. It was as if an invisible force was guiding him towards the television. When he inserted the tape and pressed play, the screen showed grainy images similar to the previous ones. The tunnels under River Street, dark and claustrophobic. But this time it wasn't a future vision. It was something that was happening at that moment. The camera advanced slowly through the tunnels, as if someone was walking with it. The walls were covered in mold, and rusty chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if something invisible had touched them. Then a figure appeared on the screen. The host. His translucent face shone weakly under the dim light as he turned the dials where his eyes should be.
Come to me.
He said in a reverberating voice.
The cycle must be completed.
The tape stopped abruptly and filled with static again. Elijah knew at that moment what he had to do. If he wanted to end this once and for all, he had to face the host directly in the tunnels. With a flashlight and a neodymium magnet, the only object he believed capable of interfering with the electromagnetic signals of channel 13.3, Elijah descended into the tunnels under River Street shortly after midnight. He had visited those tunnels before during a university excursion, but they had never felt as oppressive as now. The air was heavy and humid. As he advanced through the narrow, winding corridors, he heard whispers coming from all directions. Sometimes he thought he heard his own name, pronounced softly, intermingled with distant laughter and muffled cries. The shadows seemed to move around him, as if they had a life of their own. He finally came to a wider chamber, where the walls were marked with strange symbols engraved deep into the stone. In the center of the space, there was an antique clock, stopped at 3:03 a.m., exactly the same as the one he had seen on the Betamax tapes. That's when the host appeared. He didn't walk or emerge from the shadows. He was simply there, as if he had been waiting all along. His spectral figure seemed more solid now than before. His Victorian suit was worn but impeccable, and his translucent skin revealed dark veins pulsing slowly beneath.
Welcome to the end,
said the host in a calm but threatening voice.
You are part of the cycle now, like everyone else before you.
Elijah raised the magnet in front of him, as if it were a protective talisman. He didn't know if it would work against something as strange and inhuman as the host, but it was all he had.
I'm not going to be part of this,
said Elijah with more determination than he really felt.
I'm going to stop you here and now.
The host tilted his head slightly to one side, as if he were evaluating his words.
Stop me?
He asked with an almost amused tone.
I am not one. I am many. 71 to be exact.
Before Elijah could process what that meant, the host began to change before his eyes. His figure crumbled and reconfigured rapidly, until it became a grotesque amalgamation of superimposed human faces. Men, women, and even children whose empty eyes seemed to beg for help, while their mouths formed silent screams.
"We are the slaves drowned in the shipwreck of the Greatly,"
said the entity with multiple superimposed voices.
"forgotten by history, condemned to repeat this endless cycle until someone breaks our chain."
Elijah understood then that the host was not just an evil entity. It was a manifestation of the collective pain, trapped between dimensions due to the accumulated historical trauma in Savannah. Without wasting more time, Elijah activated the magnet, pointing it towards the stopped clock in the center of the chamber. The device began to vibrate intensely, while emitting a sharp buzzing that resonated throughout the tunnel. The host screamed in fury as his form began to disintegrate into bright fragments of floating static. The multiple voices transformed into desperate laments before fading completely along with him. When everything was over, Elijah collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved, until he noticed something strange. A last Betamax tape rested where the host had been. Trembling, he picked up the tape and quickly left the tunnel without looking back. Back in his apartment, Elijah turned on the television for the last time to see what that final tape contained. What he saw left him speechless. It was himself many years later, already old, sitting in front of the same television while tuning into channel 13.3 again. The screen filled with static before turning off completely.